The blood on Zara Bennett's hands was not her own, but it would cost her everything she had ever known in the autumn of 1882. She knelt beside the stranger in the dust outside her family's modest homestead on the outskirts of Lovelock, Nevada, her fingers pressing hard against the wound in his side where a bullet had torn through flesh and muscle. The man's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, and his dark hair was matted with sweat and desert grit. He had stumbled onto their property just after dawn, collapsing near the water trough, and Zara had been the one to find him when she went to feed the chickens. "Mama!" She had screamed, her voice cracking with urgency. "Mama, someone's hurt!" Her mother, Zara Bennett, had come running from the house, her flour-dusted hands clutching her apron. When she saw the man lying in the dirt, she went pale. "Zara, no, we cannot get involved." "He'll die," Zara said, her green eyes flashing with determination. She was 22 years old enough to make her own decisions, and she would not stand by and watch a man bleed to death on their land. "Your father will be furious," her mother warned, but Zara was already dragging the unconscious stranger toward the small barn. He was heavy, solid with muscle, and she struggled under his weight. Her mother hesitated only a moment before helping, and together they managed to get him inside and onto a pile of hay. Zara tore strips from an old sheet and pressed them against the wound. The bullet had gone clean through, which was a mercy, but he had lost a lot of blood. She worked quickly, cleaning the injury with whiskey and wrapping it tightly. The man groaned but did not wake. "Who do you think he is?" her mother whispered, wringing her hands nervously. "Does it matter?" Zara replied, checking his pulse. It was weak but steady. It did matter, as it turned out. When Zara's father, Thomas Bennett, returned home that afternoon with her two older brothers, he took one look at the stranger in the barn, and his face turned purple with rage. "Are you out of your mind, girl?" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the wooden walls. "Do you know who this is?" Zara stood her ground, though her heart was pounding. "A man who needed help." "This is one of the men who robbed the bank in town yesterday," her father spat. "The sheriff and his men have been hunting them all night. 2 people were killed in that robbery, Zara. 2 innocent people." The words hit her like a physical blow. She looked down at the unconscious man, his face peaceful in sleep, and felt her stomach twist. "I didn't know." "It doesn't matter what you knew," her father said coldly. "You've brought danger to this family. The law will come looking for him, and when they find him here, we'll all be implicated." "Then we'll explain," Zara said desperately. "We'll tell them we were just helping an injured man." Her father shook his head. "You don't understand how this works. The town is terrified. They want blood for what happened. Anyone who helped these outlaws will be treated as an accomplice." Before they could argue further, the thunder of hoofbeats filled the air. The sheriff and 6 armed men rode into the yard, their faces hard and unforgiving. Zara's father went out to meet them, and she listened from the barn as they demanded to search the property. "We tracked him here," the sheriff said, his voice carrying clearly. "We know he's here, Thomas." There was a long pause, and then her father said quietly, "He's in the barn. My daughter found him and patched him up. She didn't know who he was." The men stormed into the barn, and Zara stepped back as they roughly hauled the stranger to his feet. He woke with a start, his gray eyes wild and confused, and then they dragged him outside. Zara followed, her hands trembling. The stranger's eyes found hers as they threw him over a horse. For just a moment, their gazes locked, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not anger or accusation, but wonder, as if he could not quite believe what she had done for him. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, and then they were riding away, dust rising in their wake. Zara thought that would be the end of it, but she was wrong. That evening, a group of townspeople arrived at the Bennett homestead, led by the bank owner, Marcus Whitfield, whose clerk had been killed in the robbery. His face was twisted with grief and fury. "Your daughter gave aid to a murderer," he said to Thomas Bennett. "She's made herself an enemy of this town." "She made a mistake," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice calm. "She's young and foolish. It won't happen again." "That's not good enough," Whitfield said. "We've discussed it and the town council has decided. Your daughter is no longer welcome in Lovelock. She has 1 week to leave or we'll drive her out ourselves." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Exile. Zara felt her mother's hand grip her arm, heard her father's sharp intake of breath. "You can't do this," her mother cried. "She's just a girl." "She should have thought of that before she helped a killer," Whitfield said coldly. "1 week, Thomas. If she's still here after that, we'll burn this place to the ground." They left, and Zara's family stood in stunned silence. Her father would not look at her. Her brothers muttered angrily to each other. Only her mother wept, clutching Zara to her chest. "What have you done?" she whispered. "Oh, my darling girl, what have you done?" The next 6 days passed in a blur of packing and tears. Zara had nowhere to go, no money of her own, and no prospects. Her father gave her $50 from their meager savings and a horse, along with a letter of introduction to his cousin in California. It was more than she deserved, he told her grimly, considering what she had cost them. On the 7th day, Zara said goodbye to her family. Her mother sobbed, her brothers looked uncomfortable, and her father stood stiff and unyielding. As she rode away from the only home she had ever known, Zara did not look back. She could not bear to. She headed west, following the dusty roads through the Nevada desert. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, all sagebrush and rocky outcroppings, with the sun beating down mercilessly. She had a canteen of water, some dried meat and bread, and the clothes on her back. It was not much to start a new life with. On the 3rd day of her journey, she stopped in a small settlement called Winnemucca to rest her horse and refill her canteen. She was sitting outside the general store, eating a stale biscuit, when she heard a voice that made her freeze. "It's her. That's the girl." She looked up to see 2 men staring at her, and with a sinking feeling, she recognized them as part of the posse that had captured the stranger. They must have been passing through and spotted her by chance. "You're the one who helped that outlaw," one of them said, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Heard they ran you out of Lovelock." "I'm leaving," Zara said, standing slowly. "I'm going to California. I won't cause any trouble." "Too late for that," the man said. "Maybe we should finish what the town started." Fear shot through her, cold and sharp. She looked around desperately, but the street was nearly empty in the midday heat. The few people she could see were already turning away, not wanting to get involved. Then a new voice cut through the tension, low and steady. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." A man stepped out of the shadows of the store's overhang, and Zara's breath caught. It was him, the stranger she had saved. But he looked different now, cleaned up and dressed in dark trousers and a clean shirt, his dark hair combed back, his gray eyes sharp and alert. He moved with a confidence that spoke of danger, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "Elliot Nash," one of the men breathed, his face going pale. "We caught you. You were supposed to hang." "Plans changed," Elliot said with a slight smile that did not reach his eyes. "Now I suggest you 2 get back on your horses and ride out of here before I get unfriendly." "There's 2 of us and 1 of you," the second man said, but his voice wavered. "Are you sure about that?" Elliot asked, and suddenly there were 2 more men flanking him, both armed and looking equally dangerous. The 2 would-be attackers looked at each other, then at Elliot, and apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. They mounted their horses and rode off quickly, leaving dust in their wake. Zara stood frozen, her heart hammering. Elliot dismissed his companions with a nod and walked over to her. Up close, she could see the faint scar on his side where she had bandaged him, visible through a tear in his shirt. "You're alive," she said stupidly. "Thanks to you," he replied. His voice was rough like gravel but not unkind. "They were going to hang me, but some friends of mine broke me out. I've been looking for you." "Why?" Zara asked, genuinely confused. Elliot studied her for a long moment. "Because you saved my life when you had no reason to, because you lost everything for it. And because I owe you a debt that I intend to repay." "I don't want your money," Zara said quickly. "Good, because I wasn't offering money," Elliot said. "I'm offering you a chance to start over. A real chance, not running to California with $50 and a prayer." "I don't understand," Zara said, searching his face. "I have a ranch," Elliot said. "It's small, but it's legitimate. I bought it with money I earned honestly before I made some bad decisions. I'm trying to get back to that life, to be the man I was supposed to be. But it's lonely out there, and I could use someone who believes in second chances." "You're asking me to work for you?" Zara asked. "I'm asking you to marry me," Elliot said bluntly. Zara stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "I know it sounds crazy," Elliot said, and for the first time she saw uncertainty in his eyes. "We don't know each other, but I've been thinking about you every day since you saved me. Not just because of what you did, but because of who you are. The kind of person who would risk everything to help a stranger. That's rare, that's precious, and I don't want to let it slip away." "You're an outlaw," Zara said weakly. "I was," Elliot corrected. "That robbery was supposed to be my last job, my way to get enough money to pay off the ranch. But it went wrong and good people died. I can't change that, but I can change what happens next. I can build a life worth living, and I want to do it with you." Zara felt dizzy. This was insane. She could not marry a man she did not know, a man who had been part of a deadly robbery. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something that gave her pause: sincerity, hope, and a loneliness that matched her own. "I need time to think," she said. "I'll give you until tomorrow morning," Elliot said. "I'm staying at the boarding house at the end of the street. If you decide yes, meet me there at dawn. If you decide no, I'll understand, but at least let me give you some money to help you on your way." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Zara standing alone in the street, her mind reeling. She spent that night in the tiny room she had rented, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of her situation. She could go to California, to her father's cousin who might or might not take her in. She could try to make a life there, alone and broke and starting from nothing. Or she could take a chance on a man she barely knew, who had already demonstrated poor judgment but who looked at her like she was something worth fighting for. When dawn broke, Zara found herself walking to the boarding house. Elliot was waiting on the porch, dressed for travel, his horse already saddled. When he saw her, his face broke into a smile that transformed him, making him look younger and more vulnerable. "You came," he said. "I must be as crazy as you are," Zara replied, but she was smiling too. They were married that morning by a traveling preacher who asked no questions and accepted Elliot's money with a toothless grin. Zara wore the same dusty dress she had been traveling in, and Elliot produced a thin gold band from his pocket that he slipped onto her finger. It was the strangest wedding she could have imagined, but when Elliot took her hand and promised to honor and protect her, she felt something shift in her chest. They rode out of Winnemucca together, heading north into the mountains. Elliot's ranch was tucked into a valley near the Oregon border, he explained, far from towns and prying eyes. It was beautiful country, he promised, with good water and grazing land. As they traveled, they talked. Elliot told her about his life, how he had grown up on a farm in Missouri, how his parents had died of fever when he was 16, how he had drifted west looking for work and fallen in with the wrong crowd. The robbery had been his idea, he admitted with shame. He had convinced himself that the bank could afford to lose the money, that no one would get hurt. He had been wrong on both counts. "I'll regret it for the rest of my life," he said quietly as they made camp one evening. "Those people who died, they had families, they had futures. I took that from them." "You can't change the past," Zara said, watching the fire flicker between them, "but you can choose what kind of man you are from here on." "Is that why you saved me?" Elliot asked. "Because you believe people can change," Zara thought about it. "I saved you because you were bleeding and I couldn't walk away. I married you because I think maybe we're both trying to become better than we were." "I won't let you down," Elliot promised, and the intensity in his voice made her believe him. They reached the ranch a week later, and Zara's first sight of it took her breath away. The cabin was small but well built, nestled against a hillside with a clear stream running nearby. There were corrals for horses, a barn, and rolling meadows that stretched out toward distant mountains. It was isolated, certainly, but it was also peaceful in a way that made her chest ache with unexpected longing. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Elliot looked pleased. "I built the cabin myself. It's not much, but it's honest work." Over the following weeks, they settled into a strange new rhythm. Elliot worked from dawn to dusk, mending fences and tending to the small herd of cattle he had managed to acquire. Zara threw herself into making the cabin a home, cleaning and organizing, planting a vegetable garden, learning to cook over the wood stove. They were polite to each other, almost formal, both uncertain how to navigate this marriage they had entered into so abruptly. At night, Elliot slept on the floor near the fireplace, insisting that Zara take the bed. She protested, but he was immovable on the subject. "We may be married," he said, "but I won't presume anything. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, you'll let me know." It was both frustrating and touching. Zara found herself watching him during the day, noticing the way his muscles moved as he worked, the careful way he treated the animals, the dry humor that emerged when he was relaxed. He was a good man trying to outrun a bad past, and she understood that because she was doing the same thing. One evening in late October, a storm rolled in with frightening speed. The wind howled around the cabin, driving rain against the windows, and lightning split the sky. Zara jumped at a particularly loud crack of thunder, and Elliot looked up from where he was mending a bridle. "You're safe," he said gently. "The cabin's solid." "I know," Zara said, but she could not stop shaking. She had always hated storms. Elliot set aside his work and came to sit beside her on the old sofa. "Talk to me. Tell me something about yourself I don't know." "Like what?" Zara asked. "Anything. Your favorite memory, your secret dreams, whatever you want." Zara thought for a moment. "When I was little, my mother used to tell me stories about her grandmother who came from England. She had been a lady, supposedly, but she fell in love with a common sailor and ran away with him to America. The family disowned her, but my mother said she never regretted it because she had love." "Do you believe that?" Elliot asked. "That love is worth losing everything for?" "I used to think it was just a story," Zara admitted. "But now I don't know. I lost everything for a stranger, and here I am married to him. Maybe there's more to the story than I understood." Elliot reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. "I know this isn't the life you imagined, but I promise you, Zara, I'm going to spend every day trying to make you glad you took a chance on me." The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, Zara felt something warm and fragile beginning to bloom. She squeezed his hand and said, "I'm already glad." That night, she asked him to sleep in the bed beside her. Nothing happened beyond sleep, but lying there in the darkness with his steady breathing beside her, Zara felt less alone than she had in weeks. As autumn turned to winter, their relationship deepened. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories and dreams. Elliot taught her to ride better, to shoot, to rope cattle. Zara taught him to read beyond the basic level he had achieved, pulling out her few precious books and watching his face light up as new worlds opened before him. They laughed together, worked together, and slowly, the formality between them melted away. The first kiss happened on a cold December morning. They were standing in the barn, and Zara had just made a joke that sent Elliot into a fit of laughter. When he looked at her, his eyes were bright with joy, and suddenly he was kissing her, his hands cupping her face with infinite gentleness. Zara melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for a long moment, the world consisted only of warmth and want and the taste of his lips. When they pulled apart, Elliot looked dazed. "I've been wanting to do that for months." "So have I," Zara admitted, her cheeks flushing. After that, everything changed. They were no longer two strangers trying to make the best of an odd situation. They were a couple, genuinely and completely. Elliot moved from the floor to the bed permanently, and their nights became filled with whispered conversations, tender kisses, and eventually, passionate lovemaking that left them both breathless and amazed. "I love you," Elliot said one night, his hand stroking her hair as she lay curled against his chest. "I know I should have waited longer to say it, but I can't hold it in anymore. You've become everything to me." "I love you too," Zara replied, lifting her head to kiss him. "I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it." "Why were you scared?" Elliot asked. "Because loving someone means they can hurt you," Zara said softly. "And I'd already lost so much. I'll never hurt you," Elliot promised. "Not if I can help it." Winter passed in a cocoon of warmth and contentment. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, but neither minded. They had each other, and that was enough. Elliot carved wooden toys by the fire, talking about the children he hoped they would have someday. Zara sewed curtains and dreamed of the garden she would plant in spring. But the past has a way of catching up with the present, and in early March their peace was shattered. Zara was hanging laundry when she saw the riders approaching. 4 men, armed and official-looking. Her blood ran cold. She dropped the sheet she was holding and ran to the barn where Elliot was working. "Riders coming," she said urgently. "They look like law." Elliot's face went hard. He grabbed his rifle and strode out to meet them with Zara close behind. The riders stopped at a respectful distance, and the lead man raised his hand in greeting. "Elliot Nash," he called. "That's me," Elliot replied, his voice steady. "What do you want?" "I'm Marshall Davis from Carson City," the man said. "I'm here about the bank robbery in Lovelock last year." Zara felt her heart drop, but Elliot did not flinch. "I figured someone would come eventually. The other men involved in that robbery were caught and hanged 2 months ago," the marshal said. "But before he died, the ringleader, Jack Thornton, gave a statement. He said you weren't part of the planning. He said you were hired as a guide and didn't know about the robbery until it was happening. He said you tried to stop it when the shooting started and got shot by one of the gang for your trouble. Is that true?" Elliot was silent for a long moment. Zara held her breath. She had heard Elliot's version of events, but this added new details she had not known. "It's true that I was shot by Jack when I tried to stop him," Elliot said finally. "But I knew about the robbery beforehand. I should have said no when they asked me to guide them into town. I should have gone to the law. I didn't, and people died because of my cowardice. If you're here to arrest me, I won't fight you." The marshal studied him. Thornton's statement, combined with testimony from several other sources, paints a picture of a young man who made a bad choice but tried to make it right. "The judge has decided not to pursue charges against you, Mr. Nash. provided you're willing to testify about the gang's other activities." Zara felt tears spring to her eyes. Elliot swayed slightly as if the weight of months of fear had suddenly lifted. "I'll testify," he said hoarsely. "I'll tell you everything I know." "Good," the marshal said. "We'll need you to come to Carson City next month. Bring your wife if you'd like." The trial won't take more than a few days. After the men left, Elliot turned to Zara, and she saw that he was crying. She had never seen him cry before. She went to him immediately, wrapping her arms around him as he buried his face in her shoulder. "It's over," he said, his voice breaking. "It's finally over." "You're free," Zara whispered, holding him tight. "We both are." They went to Carson City in April, and Elliot gave his testimony. It was difficult, reliving those terrible hours, but he did it with honesty and remorse. The judge thanked him for his cooperation and formally dismissed any charges. When they left the courthouse, Elliot was a free man in the eyes of the law. That night, in their hotel room, they celebrated. Not with wild abandon, but with quiet joy, holding each other and talking about the future. They could go anywhere now, do anything. But they both agreed that the ranch was home, and home was where they wanted to be. They returned to find spring in full bloom. The meadows were green, wildflowers dotted the hillsides, and the air smelled of pine and possibility. Zara threw herself into her garden with renewed energy, and Elliot began making plans to expand the herd. In June, Zara realized she was pregnant. She told Elliot one evening after dinner, and his whoop of joy startled the horses in the corral. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down gently, afraid he had hurt her. "I can't believe it," he kept saying. "We're going to have a baby." "You're going to be a wonderful father," Zara said, touching his face. "And you're already the most amazing woman I've ever known," Elliot replied, kissing her. "I don't deserve you, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to." The pregnancy was not easy. Zara was sick for months, and the isolation of the ranch meant they could not easily get help. But Elliot was patient and devoted, taking over the household chores and caring for her with a tenderness that made her fall in love with him all over again. In February of 1884, during a snowstorm that blanketed the valley in white, Zara went into labor. Elliot had ridden to the nearest neighbor, an elderly widow named Mrs. Peterson who lived 5 miles away, and brought her back to help with the delivery. For 18 hours, Zara labored while Elliot paced outside the bedroom door, praying to a God he was not sure he believed in. When the baby's first cry split the air, Elliot burst into the room. Mrs. Peterson was holding a tiny, squalling infant with a tuft of dark hair. "You have a son," she said, smiling. Elliot approached the bed where Zara lay exhausted but radiant. She held out her arms, and Mrs. Peterson placed the baby in them. Zara looked down at her son with wonder, then up at Elliot with tears streaming down her face. "He's perfect," she whispered. Elliot knelt beside the bed, one hand gently touching the baby's tiny fist. "What should we name him?" "Thomas," Zara said. "After my father." Elliot nodded, though they both knew her father had not forgiven her. "Thomas Nash. I like it." The baby opened his eyes, dark gray like his father's, and looked at them with the serious expression of the very new. Elliot felt his heart crack open with a love so fierce it hurt. "I'm going to be the father I never had," he said softly. "I'm going to make sure he knows every day how much he's loved." "We both will," Zara said, taking Elliot's hand. Mrs. Peterson stayed for a week to help, and by the time she left, Zara was recovering well and little Thomas was thriving. The cabin was filled with the sounds of baby cries and baby laughter, and both Elliot and Zara were exhausted but happier than they had ever been. Months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and first smiles. Thomas grew quickly, a happy baby with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. Elliot proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with the baby when he was fussy, making silly faces to earn giggles, singing off key lullabies that somehow worked. In the spring of 1885, a letter arrived. It was from Zara's mother, forwarded through several addresses before finding its way to their remote ranch. With trembling hands, Zara opened it. The letter was short but momentous. Her father had died over the winter, a quick illness that took him before anyone could summon her. But before he died, he had asked for her, had expressed regret for how things had ended. Her mother wanted to see her, wanted to meet her grandchild, and hoped that Zara could find it in her heart to forgive. Zara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Elliot held her, letting her cry, and when she was done, he said, "We'll go to Lovelock. You need to see your mother." "What if the town still hates me?" Zara asked. "Then we'll deal with it," Elliot said firmly. "But you need closure, and your mother needs to meet her grandson." They made the journey in early summer, traveling slowly because of the baby. As they approached Lovelock, Zara felt her anxiety mounting. But when they arrived at her family's homestead, her mother came running out of the house, her arms open wide. "My baby," Zara Bennett cried, embracing Zara. "Oh, my darling girl, I've missed you so much." They wept together, years of separation melting away. Zara's brothers were there too, awkward but welcoming, and when Zara introduced them to Elliot and Thomas, she saw acceptance in their eyes. "The town has changed," her mother explained as they sat in the familiar kitchen. "After the outlaws were hanged, people started to question things. Some folks began to say that you were just a kind girl who made a mistake. Marcus Whitfield left town last year, bankrupt and bitter. The new banker is a much more reasonable man." "So I could have stayed," Zara said quietly. "No," her mother said firmly. "You needed to leave to find your true path. Look at you now. You have a good husband, a beautiful son, and a home of your own. Would you have had that if you had stayed?" Zara looked at Elliot, who was showing Thomas to her brothers, his face alight with pride and love. "No," she admitted. "I wouldn't have." They stayed in Lovelock for 2 weeks, and in that time, Zara made her peace with the past. She visited her father's grave and said the goodbye she had never gotten to say. She walked the streets of the town and found that while some people still looked at her with suspicion, many more greeted her warmly. She was no longer the girl who had been exiled. She was a woman who had built a life from nothing, and there was respect in that. When they returned to the ranch, Zara felt lighter. She had her family back, or at least the part of it that mattered, and she had closed a door that had been hanging open for too long. Life settled into a new rhythm. Thomas grew into a toddler, running around the ranch on sturdy legs, fascinated by everything. Elliot's cattle business prospered, and they were able to hire a young man named Jake to help with the work. Zara's garden flourished, and she began selling vegetables and preserves to nearby settlements, bringing in extra income. In 1886, Zara became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Sarah, after Zara's mother, and she had her mother's green eyes and a head of copper-colored hair that came from neither parent. "Must have been a redhead somewhere back in the family tree," Elliot said, holding his daughter with the same wonder he had shown with Thomas. Sarah was a calm baby, content to watch the world with wide eyes. Thomas, now 3, was fascinated by his little sister and appointed himself her protector. Zara's mother visited that summer, making the long journey to meet her newest grandchild. She stayed for a month, and in that time, Zara felt the last wounds of the past heal. Her mother approved of Elliot, approved of the life they had built, and told Zara she was proud of her. "You were always the bravest of my children," Zara Bennett said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Elliot play with the children in the yard. "I didn't see it when you were young, but I see it now. You followed your heart even when it cost you everything, and you built something beautiful from the ashes." "I had help," Zara said, watching her husband tickle Thomas until he shrieked with laughter while baby Sarah gurgled in her basket. "The best partnerships are built on mutual help," her mother said. "You saved him, and he saved you right back. That's what love is supposed to be." The years rolled on, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas started helping his father with the ranch work as soon as he was old enough, learning to ride and rope with natural skill. Sarah proved to have a gift for growing things, helping her mother in the garden and showing an uncanny ability to nurse sick animals back to health. In 1890, their third child was born, another boy they named Elliot Jr., but called Will to avoid confusion. He was a wild child from the start, always getting into mischief, and Elliot laughingly said he was getting paid back for his own wayward youth. The ranch continued to prosper. Elliot's reputation for honest dealing spread, and he became known as a man whose word was his bond. When a neighboring ranch was threatened by a gang of rustlers, Elliot organized the local ranchers into a protective alliance, demonstrating the leadership skills that had once been misused but were now directed toward good ends. Zara became a pillar of the small community that had grown up around the scattered ranches. She was the one people came to for medical help, for advice, for a sympathetic ear. She delivered babies, nursed the sick, and mediated disputes. The woman who had been exiled for showing compassion had built a life centered on that very quality. One evening in 1892, Elliot and Zara sat on their porch watching the sunset. The children were inside, the older ones helping the younger ones get ready for bed. It was a peaceful moment, the kind that had once seemed impossible. "Do you ever regret it?" Elliot asked suddenly. "Saving me that day," Zara looked at him in surprise. "Never. Why would you ask that?" "Because you gave up your family, your home, everything you knew," Elliot said. "All for a stranger bleeding in the dust." "I gave up a life that was too small for who I was meant to become," Zara said. "If I hadn't saved you, I would have married some local boy and spent my whole life within 10 miles of where I was born. I would have been safe, but I would have been small." "And now?" Elliot asked. "Now I have everything I never knew I wanted," Zara said, taking his hand. "A husband I love beyond reason, children who fill my heart to bursting, a home I helped build with my own hands, a purpose. I regret nothing, Elliot, not one single moment." Elliot raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I spent years running from who I was, trying to outrun my mistakes, but you taught me that redemption isn't about running. It's about standing still and building something good right where you are." "We built it together," Zara reminded him. "We did," Elliot agreed. "And I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." In 1895, Zara's mother passed away peacefully in her sleep. Zara grieved but was comforted by the fact that they had reconciled years before. Her brothers asked if she wanted any of the family belongings, and she chose only a few things. Her mother's wedding ring, the Bible her grandmother had brought from England, and a quilt her mother had made when Zara was a baby. That same year, Thomas, now 11, found a wounded hawk with a broken wing. He brought it to his mother, and together they splinted the wing and nursed the bird back to health. When it was ready to fly again, they released it, and Zara saw tears in her son's eyes as he watched it soar away. "Why are you crying?" she asked gently. "You saved it, it's free now." "I know," Thomas said, "but I'll miss it." "That's the price of love," Zara said, putting her arm around him. "We give a piece of our heart to every creature we care for, and when they leave, it hurts. But the alternative is to never love at all, and that's no life at all." Thomas nodded, understanding in a way that made him seem older than his years. He had his father's gray eyes but his mother's compassionate heart, and Zara knew he would grow into a good man. The turn of the century brought changes. The old frontier ways were fading, replaced by railways and telegraphs and a new sense of civilization. But in their remote valley, life continued much as it always had. The Nash family was known throughout the region for their integrity, their hard work, and their generosity. In 1902, when Thomas was 18, he announced his intention to study veterinary medicine. Elliot and Zara scraped together the money to send him to school in California, proud and sad in equal measure. Sarah, now 15, declared she wanted to be a teacher and began studying intensely to pass the examinations. Will, at 12, showed signs of inheriting his father's business acumen and talked of expanding the ranch. "We raised them right," Elliot said one night, lying in bed with Zara. "They're going to go out and make their mark on the world." "We did," Zara agreed. "But they'll always have this place to come home to. That's what matters." The years continued to pass. Thomas graduated and returned to set up a practice in the growing town of Elko, 40 miles south. Sarah became a teacher and taught in a one-room schoolhouse near the ranch. Will stayed home and worked with his father, proving to be a natural cattleman with innovative ideas about breeding and grazing. In 1908, Thomas married a sweet girl named Lucy, and the following year, they gave Elliot and Zara their first grandchild, a boy named Elliot Thomas Nash. When Zara held him for the first time, she marveled at how the circle of life continued, how the love she and Elliot had built kept expanding outward in ripples. Sarah married in 1910, a young lawyer named David who treated her like a queen. They settled in Elko near Thomas, and soon Sarah was pregnant with her first child. Will, the youngest, showed no interest in marrying yet, too focused on his dreams for the ranch. Elliot turned 50 in 1911, and Zara threw him a party that drew people from all over the region. As Elliot stood surrounded by friends and family, his children and grandchildren, he caught Zara's eye across the room. She smiled at him, and in that smile was everything: shared memories, enduring love, and gratitude for the unlikely path that had brought them together. Later that night, after everyone had left and they were alone in their bedroom, Elliot pulled Zara close. "29 years ago, I stumbled onto your family's property, bleeding and desperate," he said quietly. "I thought I was dying. In a way, I was. The man I had been was dying. But you gave me a chance to become someone new." "You gave me the same chance," Zara replied, resting her head on his chest. "I was trapped in a life that didn't fit, and losing everything set me free to find this." "I love you," Elliot said, the words as fervent as they had been the first time he said them. "I love you more with every year that passes." "I love you too," Zara said. "My cowboy, my husband, my heart." They held each other in the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. Outside, the Nevada wind whispered through the pines, the same wind that had blown through the valley on the day they met. But now it carried with it the sounds of home: cattle lowing in the distance, the creek burbling over stones, the soft nicker of horses in the barn. In 1915, when Zara was 55 and Elliot was 54, they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary by returning to Winnemucca, the town where they had married. The old boarding house was still there, run now by the daughter of the previous owner. They rented the same room they had stayed in all those years ago and spent the night reminiscing. "Do you remember how terrified we both were?" Zara asked, lying in bed with her head on Elliot's shoulder. "I remember thinking I was the luckiest man alive that you said yes," Elliot replied. I still think that. We were so young, Zara mused. We didn't know what we were doing. Nobody ever does, Elliot said, but we figured it out together. That's all that matters. They returned to the ranch to find that Will had made significant improvements in their absence, expanding the barn and building new corrals. He had also, to their surprise, brought home a young woman he wanted them to meet. Her name was Emma, and she was the daughter of a rancher from Idaho. She was practical and funny and clearly adored Will. Within months, they were engaged, and in the spring of 1916, they were married at the ranch in a ceremony that drew the entire family together. As Zara watched her youngest son pledge his life to his bride, she thought about the twisting path that had led her to this moment. If she had not helped a bleeding stranger, she would not have been exiled. If she had not been exiled, she would not have been in Winnemucca when Elliot found her. If Elliot had not found her, this family, this life, this love would never have existed. "What are you thinking about?" Elliot whispered, taking her hand. "How everything that seemed terrible at the time turned out to be a gift," Zara replied. "Exile," Elliot said thoughtfully. "I was exiled from decent society by my own choices. You were exiled for being decent, but we both ended up in the same place, building something better than what we left behind." "You think we would have found each other if things had been different?" Zara asked. "I think we were meant to find each other," Elliot said. "However it had to happen." The party went on around them, music and laughter filling the air, but Zara and Elliot stood together, hands clasped, existing in their own private moment of gratitude. As the years advanced, Elliot and Zara gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, leaving it in Will's capable hands. They spent their time doting on their growing number of grandchildren, who descended on the ranch every summer for long visits filled with riding and fishing and stories. Zara taught her granddaughters to garden and cook and sew, but she also taught them to shoot and ride and stand up for themselves. Elliot taught his grandsons about cattle and horses and land management, but he also taught them about honor, about keeping your word, about the importance of compassion. "You're different from other grandfathers," one of Thomas's sons said to Elliot one day. "You talk about feelings and stuff." "That's because feelings matter," Elliot said. "I spent too many years pretending they didn't, and it nearly destroyed me. Your grandmother saved me by showing me that strength and tenderness aren't opposites. They're two halves of the same thing." In 1920, the whole family gathered to celebrate Elliot and Zara's 38th anniversary. All three children were there with their spouses and children, turning the ranch into a joyful chaos of people and noise. A photographer was hired to take a family portrait, and when Zara saw the finished photograph weeks later, she wept. There they all were. She and Elliot in the center, gray-haired but still strong, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. 3 generations of love and life, all stemming from a single act of compassion on a dusty morning in 1882. "We did good," Elliot said, looking at the photograph over her shoulder. "We did," Zara agreed. "We took broken pieces and made something whole." That summer, Elliot taught his oldest grandson to rope cattle, just as he had once taught Thomas. Watching them work together, 3 generations of Nash men united by love and legacy, Zara felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever mistakes she and Elliot had made, whatever pain they had endured, it had all led to this moment, this family, this love that would continue long after they were gone. In the evenings, when the work was done and the grandchildren were tucked into bed in various corners of the expanded house, Elliot and Zara would walk together through the meadows, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. They spoke of their children's accomplishments, their grandchildren's antics, the changes they had seen in the world. But mostly they spoke of each other, of the love that had sustained them through 3 decades of marriage. "I never get tired of you," Elliot said one evening as they watched the sun set over the mountains. "After all these years, you still surprise me. You still make my heart race." "That might be your age," Zara teased, but her eyes were soft. "It's love," Elliot corrected. "It's always been love." They stood there as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, 2 figures silhouetted against the dying light, and if anyone had asked them if they had any regrets, they would have answered in unison. Not a single one. As the 1920s progressed, age began to catch up with them. Elliot's joints ached in the morning, and Zara's eyesight wasn't what it used to be. But they faced these changes together, with the same partnership that had carried them through everything else. When Elliot's back hurt too much to ride, Zara drove him around the ranch in the wagon. When Zara's hands cramped too badly to sew, Elliot read to her for hours, stumbling over the difficult words but persevering because she loved it. In 1925, they celebrated their 43rd anniversary quietly, just the 2 of them. They were sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the spring chill when Elliot said, "I want you to know something." "What?" Zara asked, turning to look at him. "If I could go back and live my life over, I wouldn't change a single thing," Elliot said. "Not the robbery, not getting shot, not any of it, because it all led me to you and you were worth everything." Zara felt tears prick her eyes. "I feel the same way. Every hardship, every moment of pain, it was all worth it to have this life with you." "Promise me something," Elliot said, taking her hand. "Anything," Zara replied. "Promise me that when I'm gone you won't grieve too long," Elliot said. "I want you to remember the joy we had, not the loss." "I promise," Zara said, though her throat was tight, "but you're not going anywhere." "We have years yet." They did have a few more years, though not as many as they hoped. In 1928, Elliot suffered a stroke that left him weakened but still himself. He could no longer work, could barely walk, but his mind was sharp and his love for Zara undiminished. She cared for him devotedly, and he joked that the roles were reversed, that now she was saving his life every day. Their children and grandchildren visited often, and the house was filled with life and love. Elliot held court from his chair by the fire, telling stories about the old days, about frontier life, about the night he met their grandmother and knew his life was about to change. On a warm summer evening in 1929, surrounded by his family, Elliot Nash passed away peacefully in his sleep. Zara was holding his hand, and she felt the moment his spirit left, felt the absence where his presence had been for 47 years. The grief was immense, a physical weight that pressed down on her chest. But she kept her promise. She mourned, yes, but she also celebrated. At his funeral, she spoke about their life together, about the love they had shared, about the legacy they had built. She spoke without tears, her voice strong, because she wanted people to remember Elliot as he had been. Vital, passionate, devoted. After the funeral, as family members prepared to return to their own lives, Thomas approached his mother. "Are you going to be all right?" he asked, concerned. "I am," Zara said, and she meant it. "I had 47 years with the love of my life. How many people can say that? I'm sad he's gone, but I'm grateful for every moment we had." Zara lived for another 5 years, watched over lovingly by her children and grandchildren. She remained active and engaged, still tending her garden, still offering advice and comfort to those who needed it. But there was a sadness in her eyes that never quite went away, a sense of waiting. In the spring of 1934, Zara fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of Thomas, who had become a respected veterinarian but also helped with human ailments when needed, she grew weaker. On a morning in early May, with the sun streaming through her bedroom window and her children gathered around her bed, Zara opened her eyes and smiled. "I see him," she whispered. "He's waiting for me." "Who, Mama?" Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. "Your father," Zara said. "My cowboy. He came back for me, just like he promised." And with that, Zara Bennett Nash closed her eyes for the last time, a smile on her lips, her hand reaching out toward something only she could see. They buried her beside Elliot on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. The entire community came to pay their respects to the woman who had shown them all what it meant to live with compassion and courage. Years later, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would tell the story of Elliot and Zara Nash, the cowboy and the exile who had found each other against all odds and built a love that lasted beyond death. They would speak of how a single act of kindness had changed the course of two lives, how exile had led to redemption, how brokenness had been transformed into beauty. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, compassion over judgment, hope over despair. And on quiet summer evenings, when the wind whispered through the pines and the sun set over the mountains, some swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand through the meadows, forever together, forever home.